He sat there in his $3,000 suit, laughing with his attorney, pointing at the empty chair beside his wife like she was already defeated. Nathan Pierce thought the divorce was already won. He thought freezing her bank accounts would break her. He thought canceling her credit cards would leave her helpless. He even told the judge, in writing, that his wife was too incompetent to secure legal representation. But Nathan forgot one crucial detail about his wife's past. He never bothered to ask about her family. When those courtroom doors swung open and she walked in, the smirk didn't just disappear from Nathan's face. The color drained from his entire existence. You are about to witness the most satisfying courtroom destruction ever recorded. But before we dive in, I want to see something. Drop a comment right now telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Last video I saw people commenting from Texas at 2 a.m., Philippines at 4 a.m., London at midnight. It blows my mind how global this community is getting. So let me know where you're tuning in from, and let's get into this story. The air inside courtroom 12 of the Cook County Circuit Court smelled like old wood polish and broken promises. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray Chicago morning where the clouds hang so low you forget the sun exists. For most people in that room, it was just another divorce hearing, another marriage reduced to paperwork and arguments over furniture. But for Nathan Pierce, this morning smelled like victory. Nathan adjusted his silk tie, a custom piece from a boutique in Milan that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He leaned back in his leather chair at the plaintiff's table and let out a small, satisfied sigh. His attorney sat beside him. Richard Calloway, senior partner at Calloway, Burke and Associates, a man whose reputation in Chicago legal circles was legendary, and not in a good way. They called him the executioner, not because he was fair, not because he was just, but because when Richard Calloway took a divorce case, the other side didn't just lose. They were financially gutted, emotionally destroyed, and left with nothing but regret. Richard charged $900 an hour. Nathan considered it money well spent. "She's late," Nathan whispered, checking his Rolex. "Typical. She can't even show up on time to her own funeral." Richard smirked, flipping through a stack of documents. "It doesn't matter if she shows up at all. We filed the emergency motion to freeze the accounts on Friday. She has no access to cash. No cash means no retainer. No retainer means no lawyer willing to touch this case. And no lawyer against me means she walks out of here with whatever scraps we decide to throw at her." Nassan nodded his eyes, drifting across the aisle to the defendant's table. And there she was. Melissa Pierce sat alone at the scarred wooden table. She wore a simple navy blue dress, the kind she might have bought at a department store sale 3 years ago. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles had turned white. There were no files in front of her. No paralegal whispering strategy. No pitcher of water. Just Melissa, staring straight ahead at the empty judge's bench with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. Nathan studied her for a moment, then let out a loud, theatrical chuckle. He wanted her to hear it. He wanted everyone to hear it. "Look at her," Nathan said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to catch every word. "Sitting there like a lost puppy. I almost feel sorry for her." "Almost. Keep your voice down," Richard warned, though a thin smile played on his lips. "Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate outbursts." "Let's get this over with quickly. I have a lunch reservation at Gibson's at noon." "Don't worry," Nathan replied, smoothing his jacket. "By noon, I'll be a free man, and she'll be looking for a studio apartment on the south side." He remembered when he first met Melissa, 10 years ago. She was working as a research assistant at Northwestern, finishing her master's degree in behavioral psychology. He was a junior sales rep at a pharmaceutical company, attending a conference where she was presenting her thesis on consumer decision-making patterns. She had been brilliant. Her presentation had captivated the room, but what Nathan noticed most was how unaware she seemed of her own beauty. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a blazer that was slightly too big for her frame. She was perfect. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was malleable. She came from nothing. Her father had died when she was young. Her mother, she had told him early on, was out of the picture, estranged. Gah. She had put herself through school and scholarships and part-time jobs. She had no one, no safety net. No one to protect her. Nathan had seen opportunity. He had courted her relentlessly. Flowers every week. Expensive dinners she tried to refuse. He told her she was special. He told her she deserved to be taken care of. He told her that her ambition was admirable. But wouldn't it be nice to not have to struggle anymore? 6 months later, she had abandoned her PhD program to marry him. 9 years later, the bailiff, a heavy-set man named Officer Daniels, who had seen enough divorces to lose faith in marriage entirely, stepped forward. "All rise," he announced. The Honorable Judge, Patricia Morrison, presiding. The courtroom shuffled to its feet as Judge Morrison entered. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair, pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen every lie, every manipulation, every trick that desperate people try to pull in family court. She had a reputation for being fair, but ruthless when it came to anyone who tried to waste her time. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and opened the file before her. "Be seated," she commanded. "Case number 2024, DR 4471, Pierce Pierce. We are here for the preliminary hearing regarding division of marital assets and spousal support." Judge Morrison looked at the plaintiff's table first. "Mr. Calloway, good to see you again." Richard stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Always a pleasure, Your Honor. We're prepared to proceed." The judge turned her gaze to the defendant's table. She frowned. "Mrs. Pierce, you appear to be unrepresented. Are you expecting counsel this morning?" Melissa stood slowly. Her voice was soft, but it didn't waver. "I am, Your Honor. She should be here." "Any moment." There was an issue with traffic. Nathan let out a loud scoff, not even trying to hide it this time. He covered his mouth with his hand, but the sound echoed through the quiet courtroom. Judge Morrison's eyes snapped to Nathan. "Is there something amusing, Mr. Pierce?" Richard was on his feet immediately, placing a calming hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Apologies, Your Honor. My client is simply exhausted from the stress of these proceedings. This separation has been difficult for him." "I see," the judge said, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word of it. She turned back to Melissa. "Mrs. Pierce, court began 3 minutes ago. If your attorney is not present, I'll have to assume you're representing yourself." "Please," Melissa said, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "Just 5 more minutes." "She's coming." "Traffic," Nathan muttered, leaning forward so his voice would carry. Or maybe the retainer check bounced. "Oh wait, you can't write a check anymore, can you?" "I made sure of that, Mr. Pierce." The judge banged her gavel sharply. "One more word and I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand me?" Nathan raised his hands in mock surrender, but the smirk never left his face. "My apologies, Your Honor. I'm just concerned about the court's valuable time being wasted." "Your concern is noted," Judge Morrison replied dryly. She looked at Melissa again, and her expression soft, just slightly. "Mrs. Pierce, I understand you're in a difficult position, but the court has a schedule to maintain. Mr. Calloway has filed a motion for an expedited judgment on asset division. If you cannot produce counsel, I may have to proceed with you representing yourself. And given the complexity of your husband's financial holdings, I would strongly advise against that." "She's coming," Melissa insisted. Her eyes were fixed on the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. "Please, I'm asking for 5 minutes." "Your Honor," Richard interjected, standing again with theatrical reluctance. "While we sympathize with Mrs. Pierce's situation, we must point out that she has had 3 months to secure representation. The fact that she appears alone today suggests she either could not find an attorney willing to take her case, or she has chosen to waste this court's time with delay tactics. We move to proceed immediately with our motion for expedited division of assets." He paused, for effect. "Mrs. Pierce has no income. She has no independent assets. She has no education that would allow her to support herself. She was entirely dependent on my client's generosity for 9 years, a generosity she repaid with suspicion, accusations, and emotional manipulation." Nathan nodded solemnly, playing the part of the long-suffering husband. "We are prepared to offer Mrs. Pierce a settlement of $15,000 and the 2019 Honda Civic currently registered in her name. This is more than fair, given that she contributed nothing financially to this marriage. Melissa's hands clenched into fists under the table, but she said nothing. Judge Morrison sighed. She picked up her gavel. Mrs. Pierce, I'm sorry. I cannot delay these proceedings any longer. We will need to proceed with the double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They exploded inward with a force that made the hinges groan. The sound echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Every head turned. Nathan spun around in his chair, annoyed at the interruption. What he saw made his blood run cold. Standing in the doorway was not a frazzled public defender running late from another case. It was not a young associate from a budget law firm. Standing there was a woman who looked like she had just stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. She appeared to be in her mid-60s, but her posture was ramrod straight, radiating an authority that made the air in the room feel thinner. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Nathan's car payment. Her silver hair was cut into a sharp, precise bob that framed a face of angular, aristocratic features. Her eyes, visible even from across the room, were a piercing steel blue that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone in a single glance. Behind her walked 3 younger associates, 2 women and 1 man, all in matching dark suits, all carrying thick leather briefcases, all moving in perfect formation like a military escort protecting a general. The woman didn't rush. She walked down the center aisle with measured steps, the click of her heels on the marble floor sounding like a countdown to detonation. Richard Calloway dropped his pen. It clattered on the table, but he didn't move to pick it up. His face, usually a mask of confident arrogance, went pale. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. "No," Reacher whispered, genuine fear creeping into his voice. "That's not possible." Nathan frowned, confused by his attorney's reaction. "Who is that?" he demanded. "What's wrong with you?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Richard didn't answer. He was staring at the approaching woman like she was death itself, walking toward him. The woman reached the defendant's table. She didn't look at Melissa. She didn't look at the judge. She turned slowly and fixed her gaze directly on Nathan Pierce. She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a lion who had just spotted a wounded gazelle and was in no particular hurry because there was nowhere for the gazelle to run. "Sorry I'm late," she said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and carried to every corner of the room without effort. "I had to file a few emergency motions with the state bar this morning regarding some irregularities I discovered in Mr. Pierce's financial disclosures. It took longer than expected to document all the fraud." Nathan's mouth went dry. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her eyes wide with recognition. "Counsel, please state your appearance for the record." The woman turned to face the bench. She pulled a gold-embossed business card from her jacket pocket and handed it to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge with something approaching reverence. "Victoria Ashworth," the woman announced, "senior managing partner at Ashworth, Chun and Morrison. I'm entering my appearance as counsel for the defendant, Mrs. Melissa Pierce." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "I'm also her mother." The silence that followed Victoria Ashworth's introduction was so complete that you could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Nathan blinked rapidly, his brain struggling to process the information. "Mother," he stammered. "That's impossible. Melissa told me her mother was dead. She said she was raised in foster care. She said she had no family." Victoria's eyebrow arched slightly, a gesture of amused contempt. "Did he? How interesting. I wonder why she would feel the need to hide her family from you." She moved around the defendant's table with the fluid grace of someone who had commanded boardrooms and courtrooms for decades. She took the chair beside her daughter, and the 3 associates positioned themselves behind her like sentinels. Melissa finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but there was something else in them now. Something that looked like a weight being lifted. Something that looked almost like hope. "I told you she was gone from my life, Nathan," Melissa said quietly. "I never said she was dead." Victoria reached out and placed her hand briefly on Melissa's arm. It was a quick gesture, businesslike, but there was warmth in it that Nathan had never seen Melissa receive from anyone. "My daughter and I had a falling out many years ago," Victoria sighed, addressing the room but keeping her eyes locked on Nathan. "She wanted to live her own life without the pressure of my expectations. without the shadow of my name. She wanted to be loved for who she was, not for what family she came from. Victoria's voice hardened into steel. She thought if she told you she came from nothing, you would love her for herself. Instead, you saw her as prey. You saw a woman with no protection, no resources, no one to defend her. And you spent 9 years slowly destroying her. That's a lie, Nathan shouted, standing up. Your Honor, this is character assassination. Sit down, Mr. Pierce, Judge Morrison commanded, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. Nathan sat, but his hands were shaking. Victoria continued, as if he hadn't spoken. When Melissa called me last week, it was the first time I had heard her voice in 11 years. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She told me that the man she had trusted with her life was trying to leave her homeless and penniless. She told me he had frozen every account, canceled every credit card, and changed the locks on the home she'd lived in for 9 years. Victoria turned to look at Nathan. She told me he had laughed at her when she begged him to be reasonable. She told me, he said, and I quote, that she should be grateful he wasn't throwing her things into the street. The gallery murmured. Several people shook their heads in disgust. I don't know who this woman is, Nathan said desperately, looking at Richard for support. Melissa's mother is dead. I saw the death certificate. You saw a forgery, Victoria replied calmly, one that Melissa created when she was 22 years old, because she was so desperate to escape my shadow that she was willing to pretend I didn't exist. I don't blame her for that. I was a difficult mother. I expected perfection. I pushed too hard. Victoria's expression softened for just a moment as she looked at her daughter. But I never stopped loving her, and when she called me, broken and afraid, I got on a plane that same night. Richard finally found his voice. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We had no notice that opposing counsel was entering the case. We need time. You need time, Victoria interrupted, her voice cracking like a whip. You filed an emergency motion to strip my client of all assets without giving her time to respond. You scheduled this hearing knowing she had no representation and no access to funds to hire anyone. You don't get to complain about fairness, Mr. Calloway. She turned to face Richard directly. Hello, Richard. I remember you. The Henderson case, 2009. You were the associates who filed discovery responses 3 days late and cost your firm a $2 million sanction. I see you've been promoted since then. Interesting career trajectory. Richard's face flushed crimson. Your Honor? He tried again, his voice strained. Mr. Calloway, Judge Morrison interrupted. I'm allowing Ms. Ashworth's appearance. This is a preliminary hearing, not a trial. If you need additional time to prepare for future proceedings, you can file a motion. But today, we're going to hear what she has to say. Victoria smiled. Thank you, Your Honor. She pulled a thick folder from her briefcase and stood, walking toward the bench. She handed a stack of documents to the bailiff. I'd like to submit these for the court's immediate review. I'm also providing copies to opposing counsel. She dropped an identical stack on Richard's table. The thud echoed through the silent courtroom. Richard stared at the documents like they might bite him. Mr. Calloway claims, my client has no assets and no grounds to contest the divorce settlement, Victoria continued. He claims that all marital property belongs solely to Mr. Pierce based on a prenuptial agreement signed 9 years ago. That prenup is ironclad, Nathan shouted, finding his voice again. She signed it willingly. She gets nothing. That was the deal. Victoria turned to face him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Mr. Pierce, she said softly, do you know who drafted the enforceability guidelines for prenuptial agreements in the state of Illinois? Nathan said nothing. I did. In 2003, I wrote the legislation that defines what makes a marital contract valid or voidable in this state. I know every loophole, every exception, every precedent. She walked closer to him. And I also know that a prenuptial agreement is automatically voidable if it can be proven that one party signed under duress. There was no duress. Nathan scoffed. She signed it at our engagement party, in front of 50 witnesses. 50 witnesses, Victoria repeated. 50 of your friends and colleagues. 50 people who had known you for years and had met Melissa for the first time that night. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have a sworn affidavit from my client detailing the circumstances of that signing. She was presented with a document at 11 p.m. after she had consumed multiple glasses of champagne in front of a room full of strangers. Mr. Pierce told her that if she didn't sign immediately, the engagement would be called off and she would be humiliated in front of everyone. Victoria pulled out another document. I also have a sworn statement from a Ms. Jennifer Walsh, who at the time was Mr. Pierce's personal assistant. Ms. Walsh was present that evening and witnessed Mr. Pierce tell my client, and I quote, "Sign it, or I'll make sure everyone knows you are just after my money." The courtroom erupted in whispers. "That's a lie," Nathan screamed, jumping to his feet. "Jennifer is lying. She's always been jealous of our marriage." "Ms. Walsh is prepared to testify under oath," Victoria continued, ignoring his outburst. "She is also prepared to testify about certain other matters she witnessed during her employment with Mr. Pierce. Matters that are quite relevant to these proceedings." "What matters?" Nathan demanded. Victoria smiled that predatory smile again. "We'll get to that. First, let's discuss the finances." She pulled out a second binder. This one was even thicker than the first. Mr. Pierce claims his total net worth is approximately $4 million, a respectable sum for a pharmaceutical sales director. Nathan straightened slightly. He was on firmer ground here. The finances were his territory. "That's correct. And Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not community property. She contributed nothing financially. She gets nothing." "However," Victoria said, her voice rising just enough to cut through his confidence, "my forensic accounting team, which includes 2 former FBI financial crimes investigators and a specialist in offshore asset recovery, spent the last 6 days conducting a rather thorough investigation." She opened the binder to a marked page. "It appears that Mr. Pierce has been systematically transferring marital assets into a holding company called Apex Medical Consulting LLC for the past 7 years. This company is registered in Delaware to avoid Illinois disclosure requirements. So look it up. The assets in this company totaled not $4 million, Mr. Pierce." She paused for effect. "But $17 million. The courtroom gasped audibly. Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not true," he whispered. "That's impossible. How could you? We also found," Victoria continued, flipping to another page, "a secondary account in the Cayman Islands, held under the name of a shell corporation called Pinnacle Holdings International. This account contains an additional $4 million in liquid assets and crypto." She looked at Judge Morrison. "In total, Your Honor, my team has identified approximately $21 million in hidden assets that Mr. Pierce failed to disclose on his financial affidavit." She turned back to Nathan. "An affidavit, I should note, that you signed under a penalty of perjury last month. That's a felony, Mr. Pierce." Nathan looked at Richard desperately. "Do something," he hissed. "Object. Say something." Richard was flipping through the documents frantically. His face was the color of ash. "Your Honor," Richard said weakly, "we need a continuance. We haven't had time to review this evidence. This is an ambush." "An ambush." Victoria laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that made several people in the gallery flinch. "Mr. Calloway, you tried to railroad a woman with no lawyer while your client mocked her to her face. You filed for expedited judgment specifically because you knew she had no resources to fight back. You don't get to complain about fairness." She walked back toward the bench. "But the hidden assets are just the beginning, Your Honor. I'd like to discuss how Mr. Pierce acquired this money." Nathan's head snapped up. His eyes went wide with sudden fear. "That's irrelevant," he said quickly. "The source of the funds has nothing to do with the divorce." "Actually," Victoria replied, "it has everything to do with the divorce. Because if those funds were acquired through criminal activity, they're subject to federal seizure, and my client, as the innocent spouse, would be entitled to protection under the innocent spouse relief provisions." She pulled out a USB drive and held it up. "Your Honor, over the past 7 years, Mr. Pierce has received approximately $12 million in payments from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. These payments were not salary. They were not bonuses. They were bribes." The courtroom exploded. People were talking over each other. Someone in the back stood up to get a better view. Order. Morrison banged her gavel. Order in this court. The room quieted, but the energy had shifted. Everyone was leaning forward, Victoria continued. Mr. Pierce was paid to ensure that certain drugs received favorable treatment from the sales teams he managed. Drugs that had not been properly tested. Drugs that later resulted in over 200 reported adverse events, including 14 deaths. You have no proof of that, Nathan shouted, standing up. His face was purple with rage and fear. That's defamation. I'll sue you. Hundreds of them, recovered from a backup server that your company SIT department failed to properly wipe when they destroyed the primary evidence last year. She held up the USB drive. Would you like me to read some of them aloud, Mr. Pierce? I particularly enjoy the exchange dated March 5th, where you wrote to your contact at Meridian, and I quote, "Don't worry about the liver damage reports. By the time the FDA catches on, we'll both be retired on a beach somewhere." Nathan's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair. Or perhaps, Victoria continued, you'd prefer I read the one where you joke about how, and again I quote, "Dead patients don't file lawsuits." Melissa was staring at her husband with an expression of pure horror. "Nathan," she whispered. "What did you do?" Nathan couldn't look at her. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a more measured tone. "I am not asking this court to adjudicate criminal matters. That's for the federal prosecutors, who will be receiving copies of these documents by the end of the day. What I am asking is that this court recognize that my client was married to a man who hid $21 million from her, while simultaneously trying to leave her destitute. A man who earned that money through criminal activity that resulted in people dying." She walked back to the defendant's table and stood behind Melissa. "My client deserves not just an equitable share of the legitimate marital assets. She deserves damages, compensation for 9 years of emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and being unknowingly married to a criminal." Judge Morrison was staring at the documents in front of her. Her expression was unreadable, but her jaw was tight. "Mr. Calloway," the judge said slowly, "do you have anything to say?" Richard stood. He looked like a man facing a firing squad. "Your Honor, we need time to verify these allegations. This is ... My client didn't. I wasn't aware." He trailed off. Nathan grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare abandon me." Nathan hissed, "I'm paying you a fortune." Richard pulled his arm free. He looked at Nathan with an expression of barely concealed disgust. "You told me there were no hidden assets. You told me this would be a simple case. You told me she had no family." "I didn't know," Nathan protested. Richard shook his head. "Your Honor, at this time, I need to request a brief recess to confer with my client about whether I can continue to represent him given these revelations." "Denied," Judge Morrison said flatly. "Mr. Calloway, you can file a motion to withdraw after this hearing if you choose, but no one is leaving this courtroom until I understand what I'm dealing with." She turned to Victoria. "Ms. Ashworth, what exactly are you requesting today?" Victoria stood tall. "3 things, Your Honor. First, an immediate freeze on all of Mr. Pierce's assets, including the Delaware LLC and the Cayman accounts, pending a full forensic audit." "Granted," the judge said without hesitation. Nathan made a strangled sound. "Second," Victoria continued, "I request that Mr. Pierce be ordered to vacate the marital residence within 24 hours, and that my client be granted exclusive occupancy until these proceedings are concluded." "That's my house," Nathan shouted. "It's a marital asset," Judge Morrison replied coldly, "and given the evidence of hidden accounts and potential criminal activity, I'm granting Mrs. Pierce exclusive occupancy. Mr. Pierce, you have 24 hours. And third," Victoria said, "I request a temporary restraining order prohibiting Mr. Pierce from having any contact with my client outside of court-supervised communication. Given the pattern of financial abuse and manipulation documented in my filing, I have serious concerns about my client's safety." "Your Honor, this is outrageous," Nathan yelled. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Morrison's voice was ice, "you have spent the last 3 months systematically destroying your wife. As financial independence, while hiding $21 million in secret accounts, You have allegedly taken bribes that resulted in people's deaths. You do not get to lecture anyone about what is outrageous." She banged her gavel. "Temporary restraining order granted. Mr. Pierce, you are to have no contact with Mrs. Pierce, except through your attorneys. You are to vacate the marital residence by noon tomorrow. You are to make no transfers, withdrawals, or modifications to any accounts until the forensic audit is complete." She looked at the documents again. "I'm also referring the criminal allegations to the state's attorney and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Ms. Ashworth, please ensure they receive copies of everything you've submitted today." "Of course, Your Honor," Victoria replied. Judge Morrison stood. "We will reconvene in 3 weeks for a full hearing on asset division. Mr. Pierce, I strongly suggest you use that time to find a criminal defense attorney in addition to your divorce counsel. You're going to need both. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down like an executioner's blade. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters who had been sitting in the back rushed forward. Cameras flashed. People were shouting questions. But Nathan heard none of it. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at the table in front of him, as his entire life collapsed around him like a building with its foundation removed. Richard was already packing his briefcase, moving with the urgency of a man fleeing a sinking ship. "Rita." Nathan grabbed his arm. "You can't leave. We need to fight this. We need to appeal." Richard pulled free. "There's nothing to fight, Mr. Pierce. You lied to me. You told me there were no hidden assets. You told me she was alone in the world. You told me this would be a simple case." He snapped his briefcase shut. "I'm filing a motion to withdraw this afternoon. Find yourself another lawyer. Actually, find several. You're going to need a divorce attorney, a criminal defense attorney, and probably a civil rights attorney for when the federal charges start rolling in." "You can't abandon me," Nathan shouted. "I paid you a $200,000 retainer, and I earned every penny of it trying to salvage your lies," Richard shot back. "Consider the retainer fully consumed. Good luck, Mr. Pierce. You're going to need it." He walked out without looking back. Nathan turned to the defendant's table. Melissa was standing, hugging her mother. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. Victoria was stroking her daughter's hair, whispering something that made Melissa laugh through her tears. One of the associates was already on the phone, probably coordinating with the forensic accountants. Another was packing documents with military precision. The third was speaking to a reporter, providing carefully worded statements. Nathan stood on shaky legs and walked toward them. "Melissa," he said. She looked up. The smile faded from her face, replaced by something Nathan had never seen in her eyes before. Not fear, not love, not even hatred. Indifference. "Don't," she said simply. "Melissa, please, we can talk about this. We can work something out. I made mistakes, but—" "Mistakes?" Victoria interrupted, stepping between Nathan and her daughter. "You call systematically destroying a woman's autonomy while hiding millions of dollars in blood money mistakes." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Nathan could hear. "You took my daughter away from me for 11 years because she was so desperate to escape her family name that she invented a whole new identity. And then you spent 9 years convincing her that her only value was as your accessory. You told her she wasn't smart enough to work. You told her she wasn't capable of managing money. You told her that no one would ever love her the way you did." Victoria's eyes were blazing. "You didn't love her, Mr. Pierce. You collected her. And now you're going to pay for every single day of those 9 years." She turned away dismissively. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you something to eat. You need to keep your strengths up." Melissa let her mother guide her toward the exit, not sparing Nathan another glance. "Wait," Nathan called out desperately. "There's something you should know. Something I haven't told you." No one stopped. "Melissa, you're making a mistake. I know things about your mother, about her firm, about the cases she's buried. If you think she's some kind of hero—" The words died in his throat as Victoria turned back. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was pity, the same way someone might look at a bug they were about to step on. "Mr. Pierce," she said calmly. "I have been practicing law for 40 years. I have faced down senators, CEOs, and actual criminals who make you look like a jaywalker. Every threat you can think of, every secret you imagine you have, every desperate card you think you're holding. I've seen it all before." She smiled. "You're not a worthy adversary. You're not even a challenge. You're just a small, sad man who thought he was smarter than everyone else." She turned back to her daughter. "Let's go." They walked out. Nathan stood alone in the emptying courtroom. The reporters had given up trying to get a statement from him. The bailiff was waiting impatiently to lock up. Even the court stenographer was packing her equipment, carefully avoiding eye contact. Nathan Pierce, who had walked into this courtroom expecting a quick victory, was now facing federal criminal charges, financial ruin, and the complete destruction of everything he had built. And the worst part, it was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, things got worse. The forensic audit uncovered an additional $6 million. Nathan had hidden in real estate holdings registered under his brother's name. His brother, confronted with the possibility of being charged as an accessory, had immediately cooperated with investigators and provided a detailed accounting of every dollar Nathan had funneled through him. The FBI had opened a formal investigation into the Meridian Pharmaceuticals connection. 2 executives at the company had already been arrested. A third had fled the country. Nathan's name was mentioned prominently in every news report as an unindicted co-conspirator. His face was on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. Pharmaceutical exec hid millions while wife starved. The headline screamed. Jennifer Walsh, his former assistant, had given an exclusive interview to a local news station. She described, in devastating detail, how Nathan had treated Melissa during their marriage. The isolation, the financial control, the constant criticism disguised as concern. She also revealed something that Melissa hadn't known. The affair, Nathan had been having a relationship with a junior sales representative named Amanda Choom for 3 years. He had been paying for her apartment, her car, and her graduate school tuition, using money from the secret accounts. When Melissa saw the interview, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply nodded, as if confirming something she had always suspected but could never prove. "Of course," she said to her mother. "Of course, there was someone else." The final hearing was held on a bright April morning. Nathan arrived with a new attorney, a criminal defense specialist named Marcus Webb, who charged even more than Richard Calloway had. Marcus had advised Nathan to settle quickly and quietly, to give Melissa whatever she wanted in exchange for his silence about the worst of the criminal allegations. But Nathan had refused. He still believed he could win. He still believed that his intelligence, his cunning, his ability to manipulate situations would save him. He was wrong. Victoria had spent the 3 weeks since the preliminary hearing building an airtight case. She had deposed Amanda Choon, who had provided receipts, text messages, and embarrassingly detailed testimony about Nathan's promises to leave his wife as soon as the timing was right. She had obtained Nathan's medical records, which revealed that he had undergone a vasectomy 6 years ago without telling Melissa. For 6 years, Melissa had believed they were trying to have children. For 6 years, she had blamed herself for their failure to conceive. When that revelation came out in court, even the bailiff looked disgusted. Victoria had also uncovered something else, something Nathan had buried so deep he had almost forgotten about it himself. When he was 25, Nathan had been engaged to another woman. Her name was Rebecca Torres. The engagement had ended abruptly, and Rebecca had disappeared from his life. Victoria found her. Rebecca testified via video link from her current home in Oregon. She described a pattern of behavior that was hauntingly similar to what Melissa had experienced. The charm, the love bombing, the gradual isolation, the financial control. And then, when Rebecca had tried to leave, Nathan had done something that made Melissa gasp out loud in the courtroom. He had threatened to kill himself if she didn't stay. "He told me he would drive his car off a bridge," Rebecca said, her voice steady but her eyes haunted. "He told me his death would be my fault. I was 23 years old. I believed him. I stayed for another year before I finally got the courage to run." Nathan tried to object, tried to claim that Rebecca's testimony was irrelevant, that it was ancient history, that she was a scorned ex-lover with an axe to grind. Judge Morrison overruled him. By the time Victoria finished her presentation, the case was essentially over. Judge Morrison awarded Melissa 70% of all marital assets, including the hidden accounts. Given the evidence of fraud, concealment, and emotional abuse, the judge ruled that an equitable split was not appropriate. Nathan would keep 30%. But after the federal fines, the back taxes, the penalties for hiding assets, and the civil lawsuits that were already being filed by families of people who had died taking the drugs he had promoted, 30% wouldn't be enough to rent an apartment. Furthermore, Judge Morrison ordered Nathan to pay $300,000 in attorney's fees to cover the cost of Victoria's forensic investigation. And finally, she referred the complete transcript of the proceedings to the U.S. Attorney's Office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution. The divorce was finalized at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. Melissa walked out of the courthouse, a free woman. Nathan walked out facing federal indictment. 2 weeks after the hearing, Nathan made a desperate move. He still had access to one thing Victoria hadn't found: a burner phone with a list of contacts from his years in the pharmaceutical underground. Men who solved problems for money. Men who didn't ask questions. Nathan sat in the cramped apartment he was renting by the week, a far cry from the Lincoln Park mansion he had once called home. The walls were thin. He could hear his neighbor's television through the drywall. The carpet smelled like decades of cigarette smoke. He stared at the phone in his hand. One call. That's all it would take. Victoria Ashworth might be untouchable in a courtroom, but courtrooms weren't the only battlefields. He started to dial, then he stopped. What was he doing? What had he become? He thought about Melissa, not the Melissa he had controlled for 9 years, but the Melissa he had first met. The brilliant young researcher with the shy smile. The woman who had believed in him when he was nobody. He had destroyed her, and now he was considering something that would destroy him completely. Nathan put the phone down. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't take the easy path. He didn't manipulate. He didn't scheme. He just sat in that miserable apartment and let the reality of what he had done wash over him. He cried, not for himself, not for his lost money or his ruined reputation. He cried for the man he could have been if he had chosen differently. The next morning, Nathan called Marcus Webb. "I want to cooperate," Nathan said. "Fully, with the feds, with the state, with everyone. I'll testify against Meridian. I'll give them everything." Marcus was silent for a long moment. "You understand what you're saying? The executives at Meridian have resources. They have connections. If you testify against them, your life could be in danger. I know. And it won't keep you out of prison. It might reduce your sentence, but you're still looking at years behind bars." "I know that too." "Then why?" Nathan looked out the window at the gray Chicago sky. "Because I'm tired of being the villain." The cooperation agreement took weeks to negotiate. Nathan provided testimony that led to the indictment of 4 additional Meridian including the CEO. He detailed the entire bribery scheme, the falsified drug trials, the payments that had funded his secret lifestyle. His testimony was featured on the front page of every major newspaper. Victoria watched the coverage with a complicated expression. "He's trying to rebuild himself," Melissa said, sitting beside her mother in the brownstone. "Do you think it's genuine?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "I think," she said slowly, "that people are capable of change. I also think that change doesn't erase harm. He can become a better person and still deserve to face consequences for what he did." She looked at her daughter. "The question isn't whether he's changed. The question is whether his change matters to you." Melissa was quiet for a long time. "It doesn't," she finally said. "Not anymore. I spent 9 years making his feelings the center of my universe. I'm done with that. Whatever journey he's on, it's his journey. Mine is right here." She gestured around the room. The warm walls, the comfortable furniture, the photos of her and her mother that now decorated the mantel. "This is my life now," she said. "And it's a good one." Victoria smiled. "Yes, it is." The Meridian trial was a media sensation. Nathan took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. He answered every question, no matter how damaging to himself. He admitted to things that made the jury gasp. He provided documentary evidence that had been hidden for years. The Meridian executives watched him with murder in their eyes. When the cross-examination came, their defense attorneys tried to destroy Nathan's credibility. They called him a liar, a cheat, a man who would say anything to save himself. Nathan didn't flinch. "Yes," he said simply. "I am all of those things. I was a liar. I was a cheat. I said whatever I needed to say to get what I wanted. That's exactly why you should believe me now. I know how this system works, because I was part of it. I know where the bodies are buried because I helped bury them." The lead defense attorney pressed harder. "And why should this jury believe that you're telling the truth now? What's changed?" Nathan looked at the jury. Then he looked at the gallery, where a reporter was furiously taking notes. He thought about Melissa, who he knew wouldn't be there. She had moved on. She was building a new life. "I lost everything," Nathan said quietly. "My money, my reputation, my wife, my freedom. And in the process, I finally had to look at who I really was. I didn't like what I saw." He took a breath. "I can't undo what I did. I can't bring back the people who died because of drugs I pushed. I can't give my ex-wife back the years I stole from her, but I can tell the truth. Finally, maybe for the first time in my life," he turned back to the defense attorney. "So yes, believe me. Not because I'm a good person. Believe me because I'm a bad person who finally got tired of lying." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The Meridian executives were sentenced to a combined total of over 200 years in federal prison. The company itself was forced into bankruptcy. Billions of dollars were set aside for victim compensation. Nathan's cooperation reduced his sentence from a potential 20 years to 12. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. During this time, Melissa had been rebuilding herself piece by piece. She started therapy. Not couples therapy, not the kind Nathan had always refused to attend, but real individual therapy with a trauma specialist who understood what financial abuse and coercive control did to a personal sense of self. It was brutal work. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. Some days the rage was so overwhelming she had to leave the house and walk for hours just to burn it off. But slowly, she started to remember who she had been before Nathan. She remembered the girl who had earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, the woman who had been on track for a prestigious academic career, the researcher whose work had been called groundbreaking by her advisors. Nathan had convinced her that woman was a fantasy, that she wasn't really that smart, that her success had been luck, not talent. Now, with her mother's support and her therapist's guidance, Melissa began to understand the truth. She had always been brilliant. Nathan had just spent 9 years convincing her she wasn't. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Melissa made a phone call. "Dr. Harrison," she said when the line connected. "This is Melissa. Melissa Pierce. Well, Melissa Ashworth. Now, I was your doctoral student 11 years ago." There was a pause. "Melissa," the voice on the other end said warmly, "I've thought about you over the years. I always wondered what happened. You just vanished." "I got married," Melissa said simply. "It didn't work out, but I'm wondering, is it too late to come back? I mean, to finish what I started?" Dr. Harrison laughed. "Melissa, your preliminary research was some of the most promising work I've ever supervised. It is never too late. When can you start?" Melissa enrolled in the doctoral program that fall. It was hard. She was nearly 40, surrounded by students half her age. Her research skills were rusty. The field had changed in 11 years, but she had something the younger students didn't have. She had survived. She had walked through fire and come out the other side. She understood things about human psychology, about power dynamics, about the way people manipulate and control each other that couldn't be learned from textbooks. A dissertation topic emerged naturally. The financial architecture of coercive control, how abusers use money to trap their victims. It was personal. It was painful to research. Every interview with a survivor reminded her of her own experience. But it was also important, and it was hers. Victoria came to visit every few weeks, flying in from Washington where she was consulting on legislation related to financial abuse protections. Each time, she marveled at the change in her daughter. "You look different," Victoria said one evening, watching Melissa grade student papers at the kitchen table. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like something heavy has been lifted off your shoulders." Melissa smiled. "I think I finally stopped carrying him around with me. For years, even after the divorce, I was still living in reaction to Nathan. Afraid of becoming what he said I was, angry at what he did, obsessed with making sure he got what he deserved." She set down her pen, but somewhere along the way, I realized he wasn't thinking about me at all. He was in prison, dealing with his own consequences, and I was out here, still letting him take up space in my head. Victoria nodded slowly. "So what changed?" "I just got tired," Melissa said. "Tired of being angry. Tired of being a victim. Tired of letting the worst thing that ever happened to me define everything else." She looked at her mother. "You know what I realized? The best revenge isn't making sure he suffers. The best revenge is being happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Despite everything he did." Victoria's eyes glistened. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Melissa said, even if it took me 11 years to admit it. 8 months later. The Chicago winter was brutal, but inside the Lincoln Park brownstone that Melissa now owned outright, it was warm. She sat on the couch, her feet tucked beneath her, watching her mother pour tea in the kitchen. Victoria had stayed in Chicago after the trial. She claimed it was to help Melissa get back on her feet, but the truth was simpler. She had missed her daughter. 11 years of silence had taught her what was truly important. "Two news, some," Victoria called out. "Do you want to see it?" Melissa shrugged, but she didn't say no. Victoria turned up the volume. Former pharmaceutical executive Nathan Pierce was sentenced today to 12 years in federal prison for his role in a bribery scheme that prosecutors say contributed to the deaths of at least 14 people. The anchor announced on screen Nathan was being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. He looked gaunt. His hair, once perfectly styled, was thinning and gray. He looked 20 years older than he had at that first hearing. He turned toward the camera as they led him away. For just a moment, his eyes seemed to find the lens, seemed to stare directly at Melissa through the screen. Then he was gone. Melissa let out a long, slow breath. "How do you feel?" Victoria asked, sitting down beside her. Melissa considered the question. "I thought I would feel satisfied," she said slowly. "I thought I would feel vindicated. But mostly I just feel tired, tired and sad. Sad for him." Melissa shook her head. "Sad for the years I lost. Sad for the person I was before I met him. Sad for all the things I could have done if I had even spent 9 years believing I was worthless." Victoria put her arm around her daughter. "You're not worthless," she said firmly. "You never were. He made you believe that because small men need to make others feel small, to feel big themselves." Melissa leaned into her mother's embrace. "I'm going back to school," she said quietly. "I called Northwestern last week. They said I could re-enroll in the doctoral program. Pick up where I left off." Victoria's face lit up. "Melissa, that's wonderful. It'll take years. I'm almost 40. So," Victoria replied, "You'll be almost 40 whether you go back to school or not. Might as well be almost 40. With a doctorate." Melissa laughed. It was the first time she had really laughed in months. "There's something else," she said. Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. Victoria's eyes widened. "Melissa, are you, I found out last week," Melissa said, tears forming in her eyes. "I don't know how. The doctors said it was impossible after what he did. But somehow." Victoria was crying now, too. "It's a girl," Melissa whispered. They held each other on the couch as the winter sun set over Chicago. Somewhere in a federal prison in southern Illinois, Nathan Pierce was learning what it meant to have nothing. No money, no power, no one to control. Just a concrete cell and 12 years to think about the woman he had underestimated. The woman who had walked into his courtroom looking defeated, helpless, alone. The woman whose mother had burned his world to the ground. 5 years later, A little girl with curly brown hair and her grandmother's steel blue eyes ran through a sunlit park in downtown Chicago. "Mommy, look!" she shouted, pointing at a butterfly. "It's beautiful." "It is," Melissa agreed, catching up to her daughter. "Just like you. Just Dr. Melissa Ashworth, as she now called herself, had completed her doctorate 2 years earlier. Her dissertation on coercive control in intimate relationships had been published to wide acclaim. She now ran a nonprofit that helped abuse survivors rebuild their financial independence. Victoria, recently turned 70, but showing no signs of slowing down, sat on a nearby bench watching her granddaughter play. "She comes to visit you next month," Victoria said as Melissa sat down beside her. Melissa nodded. Rebecca Torres, Nathan's first victim, had become a close friend over the years. She flew in every few months to speak at Melissa's nonprofit events. "Have you heard anything about him?" Victoria asked carefully. Melissa shook her head. "I don't want to hear anything about him. He's not part of our lives. He never really was." She watched her daughter chase the butterfly, laughing with pure, unself-conscious joy. "I used to wonder," Melissa said quietly, "what would have happened if you hadn't walked through those courtroom doors? Where would I be now?" Victoria took her hand. "You would have survived," she said firmly. "You would have found a way. You're stronger than you ever knew." Melissa smiled. "Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out." The butterfly landed on a flower. The little girl crouched down to watch it, completely entranced. "Grandma," the little girl called out, "the butterfly has blue wings like your eyes." Victoria laughed. "That's because it knows quality when it sees it," she called back. Melissa leaned against her mother's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For teaching me that it's never too late to fight back. For showing my daughter what a strong woman looks like. For being here." Victoria kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Always," she said. "Always." Nathan Pierce served 9 years of his 12-year sentence before being released on good behavior. He emerged from prison to find a world that had completely forgotten him. The pharmaceutical industry had blacklisted him. His former colleagues denied knowing him. His brother, who had testified against him, had changed his last name and moved to another state. He had nothing. He lived in a halfway house for 6 months, then a series of cheap apartments. He worked minimum wage jobs. He attended mandatory therapy sessions where he was forced to confront the harm he had caused. Slowly, painfully, something in him began to change. It took years. But eventually, Nathan Pierce began to understand what he had done. Not just the crimes, not just the fraud, but the fundamental cruelty of treating another human being as property to be controlled rather than a person to be loved. He wrote Melissa a letter. It wasn't a request for forgiveness. It wasn't an attempt to explain or justify. It was simply an acknowledgement. "I was wrong. I was cruel. I'm sorry." Melissa read the letter once. Then she burned it. So many chapters she had learned are better left closed. And that, my friends, is how a man who mocked his wife for having no lawyer learned that some women have something far more valuable than money. They have mothers who will burn the world down to protect them. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Melissa's situation? Would you have burned the letter, or would you have written back? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story gave you that satisfying feeling of justice being served, smash that like button. It really does help the channel grow more than you know. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. I've got an absolutely insane one coming. Trust me, you're going to want to see how that one ends. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.